Hi, my name is Jim Selmeyer, and I'm the founder of Rascal Games and the creator of an indie arcade puzzle game called Ecstasy. Today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the development of the game and how I incorporated the agile mentality of software development to make the game as accessible as possible. The first thing that I'm going to do is that I'm going to explain a little bit about myself. So who am I? What is my background? What do I do? Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the game so you have an idea what it's all about. Then I'm going to continue talking about accessibility, but more in the sense of why is it so important that I focused on accessibility, and how did accessibility become such a central theme during development. Then for the final part, we're going to actually look at my method of development and how I used the agile mentality to make Ecstasy more accessible. So who am I and what do I do? Well, I used to be a brain researcher and neuroscientist, but then during my PhD, I realized that the funnest part of my work as a scientist was programming, basically writing the analysis programs with which I did my data analysis. So after my PhD, I became a data scientist. But as a data scientist, I ended up doing a lot of backend implementations. I combined the use of data science with backend development. So I became more of a backend developer. It was around that time that I also became leader of the tech team at the time. And this eventually led to me becoming the CTO co-founder of a small startup in Berlin called Workbee. But I'm not here to talk to you about Workbee. I'm here to talk to you about Rascal Games. I think that pretty much every single programmer that is also a gamer ends up attempting to make a video game. And my first attempt to make a video game is this game called Ecstasy. I basically started developing the game at the beginning of 2020 when the first Corona wave hit Germany. I suddenly had a lot of time in my hands, so I really went to town on this concept. So what is Ecstasy? Well, Ecstasy is a combination of some of the concepts that you see in a puzzle game like Tetris and those that you see in Lumines. So it's a combination of Tetris and Lumines to some extent. In this game, you have shapes of 3, 4, or 5 separate blocks falling from the top of the game screen. And all of these shapes, they consist out of blocks of 2 or 3 different colors. And it's up to the player to combine blocks of the same color to form squares or big combinations of that. Now there is a scan line that goes from top to bottom that scans all the blocks of the same color as the scan line. So here you see the yellow line here is going down and it passes a square of yellow blocks. It then marks those, and once it reaches the bottom, then you score points. Now the scan line goes up to the top again, and it changes color. Now it's white, and now it will take down those white blocks that you see here on the right-hand panel. Actually, it makes more sense for me to just show you. So I put together a small trailer, and you guys can have a look. Welcome back. So, accessibility became a central theme during development. One of the reasons accessibility became such a big topic during development was that I knew that I had to add in a colorblindness mode or a colorblindness setting, because without it, people with colorblindness would have trouble playing the game. So I posted an early version of the colorblindness mode on Reddit, and that's where I got into contact with Ian Hamilton, who pointed me to the direction of the Xbox accessibility guidelines and the Game Accessibility Conference of 2020. There, I also met, for instance, Antonio Martinez, who was also a very viable, a very important resource during development. Gave a lot of important feedback, and actually reviewed the game, made a mobility review of the game. So why are accessibility features so important? Well, when you think about it, it really does not make sense to not include them. A lot of people have disabilities, and if you're not adding accessibility features to your game, they cannot play it. So you have less, like a lower amount of people that can potentially play and enjoy your game. And as a small indie game studio, what you absolutely have to do is do everything in your power to make sure that a lot of people get to play your game. So overall, between 15 and 26% of all people live with some sort of disability. Of course, I'm not saying that 15 to 26% of all gamers also have some sort of disability. That would probably be an overstatement. The thing is, though, if we would make games more accessible, more people with a disability would also become gamers. Like, if we would live in a world where all games are accessible, then a person with a disability would just be able to pick a game and play it. This would also cause more people with disabilities to be interested in video games and to join the gaming community. Aside from expanding the amount of people that can play your game, accessibility also serves to make a better, more flexible product. One example is, of course, subtitles. I always turn on subtitles no matter what I watch or what I play, because when I am maybe watching a movie and eating chips, I still want to be able to follow what is being said. But as I'm chewing down on chips, I hear the crackling noise, and sometimes I cannot hear what they're saying, and I don't want to turn on the sound so loud because, in Germany, people will knock on your door if your sound is too high, right? They will, especially after 10 p.m. Another example of a more flexible product is in my game Ecstasy. The rhythm mode requires you to move your pieces to the beat in order to not die and lose the game. I have added controller vibration so now the controller vibrates to the beat, so you're not as reliant anymore on hearing the music. This allows me now to turn on a podcast or turn on some other music and still enjoy that as I am playing the game, because now the controller vibrates, I know when the beat is, I can still play the mode. How is Ecstasy developed, and how did I incorporate accessibility into the process? Well, as I explained to you before, the way that I develop software, web applications, for instance, WorkBee or clients of myself, is with the Scrum methodology, which is a form of agile software development. So naturally, the way that I develop video games is also done with an agile mindset. Of course, I don't have a whole team to develop the game with. I did it by myself, but still, some of the ideas of the agile mentality and the Scrum framework are still very powerful, and you can still use them when you're just by yourself. Not everybody here will know what Agile means or what Scrum is, so I'm going to explain to you a little bit more about its background, just a couple of slides. Before I can explain you more about Agile and Scrum and the way that I use it, I have to explain to you how people used to develop software back in the day. It was done in this process called the waterfall process, or the waterfall software development. And the way that they did it was through a series of cascading steps. So here you see the basically the 5 steps of the waterfall system. So one of the issues of waterfall software development is that there was not a lot of communication between the steps. So the people that come up with the product requirement documentation, with the software architecture, and then the implementation, they would all be in their own separate silos. So there wasn't a lot of exchange of information there. An even bigger issue is, of course, that you start verifying whether the software is what you want at the end when you have developed the complete thing. Because there is no connection with users and clients, and you don't have like a iterative process to make an application and let it grow together with your user base, you would have a piece of software at the end that was just not tested. You can sometimes tell whether an application that you use, especially from back in the day, has been made with waterfall or with more agile methods, when it has a lot of features that you would never use, or the vast majority of users never uses, or when you're looking for a very basic functionality, but it's hidden very deep inside some menu that's very difficult to find, and there's no way for you to find it just based on your own intuition. Like, these are typical signs of software not being developed together with a user. So then a bunch of developers came together and they wrote the Agile Manifesto, and this brought a huge paradigm shift. We have here a print screen, a screenshot of the Agile Manifesto. You can still find it today at agilemanifesto.org. And what this did is that they basically set forth 4 important rules to generate this agile mentality. So what they did was they started to favor individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So no longer were the designer of the application, the developer, and the person that came up with the requirements in separate silos. They would all be together and they would be interacting, coming up with what they had to build throughout the whole process. They would favor working software over comprehensive documentation. One of the side effects of this waterfall method was that you would get this massive documentation that nobody used, nobody read really, aside from as a legal document to get more features in the application. And then they favored customer collaboration over contract negotiation. What this means is that no longer was it necessary to worry too much about the features that you want in at the beginning of the application. No, now what we're going to do is that we're going to work together with the user, or in the video game, the player, to figure out what it is that we should be building, that we should improve. Then finally, they favored responding to change over following a set plan. So one thing that you can see in the waterfall method is that they would have a plan and then they would follow it. It would be a very rigid process. They set out what they were doing, what they were going to do months down the line. Whereas in agile software development, this can change constantly. You get new information from the customer, or maybe you would you would figure out one of the issues that they have with the application, and then you can immediately change it depending on how important that is. So the software that you want to build at the beginning of development may be slightly different or very much different from the product that you eventually end up making, because you allow more information to influence the development process. And of course, one of the bigger methods of agile software development is the Scrum framework. So when we're talking about Scrum, there's actually a couple of things that make it incredibly important and valuable. And those are the things that I took with me into the way that I developed Ecstasy. The three most important things of Scrum are the way that they prioritize the backlog, it's the iterative process, and the ongoing incorporation of feedback from stakeholders. So, prioritizing accessibility and gameplay. When you're making a game, you could say, yeah, I mean, the gameplay elements, like everything that makes the game is of course much more important than adding accessibility features. You can say that, you'd be half wrong. The way that I did the prioritization of accessibility with the gameplay was twofold. I identified two ways of prioritizing accessibility with gameplay. I identified the direct incorporation of accessibility features with gameplay and the indirect one. So the direct one is typically where the gameplay and the accessibility implementation exist from the same code. They're typically low-hanging fruit, and they are often part of a good design pattern. However, if you skip them, if you don't work on them and you want to implement them later, they become more work the longer they are skipped. Actually, let me show you what I mean by this by taking some examples from Ecstasy's accessibility menu. So here you see the accessibility menu. From top to bottom, we have the color blindness settings. When you click on it, the color blindness mode is engaged. So what happens is that the fixed colors, they change to colors that person of that particular color blindness can typically identify, and the background turns gray. Then we have the set fixed colors option. You can choose your own colors. So you can choose your own colors of the blocks. Then there is the animation brightness. You can set the background, different brightnesses. You could turn it all the way down so you cannot see the background anymore, which makes the game pop out more, so you won't be as distracted by the dancing background. Then we have screen shake. I really like screen shake in my games. I will always add screen shake in my games because it makes it very cool, very, very engaging. But if you get vertigo or something because of that, there's some people that don't like to have screen shake in the games that they play. So for those people, I added a feature to turn it off. Then you have rumble to beat. As I explained, there is a rhythm mode in the game, and you can turn off the controller vibration if you don't want to have it. So here you see some of the examples of the direct implementation of an accessibility feature together with a gameplay feature. I could have, on one side, hard-coded the colors in the game so that the colors are always the same. But then if I would have wanted to add the option to then change the colors, I would have to go back, open up the code, change the code, and make it variable. This would be much work, especially if more of the game has been based off of those particular colors. Then the game suddenly becomes a lot more difficult to change later on. Another example is screen shake. When I implemented screen shake, I immediately added the feature to turn off screen shake. Now it's part of the same code. It's just a simple if statement that if a screen shake has been turned off, then we don't shake the screen. So these are examples of accessibility features that you make together with the gameplay feature. They make more sense to do immediately as you are developing a certain gameplay element or a visual feature. We also have the indirect implementation of accessibility features and together with gameplay. And these have a different aspect. So the gameplay and the accessibility implementation exist from different code. They are basically a different feature. They are like an addition to the main feature, if you will. And they can be easily implemented after the main feature is done. So here I also marked the indirect accessibility features. So let's talk about, for instance, color blindness. So when you click color blindness, the colors get set, but also the background changes. So the way that that works is that the shader of the background animation gets turned to gray tones. Now, the game was meant to be played with a colorful dancing background. However, for color blindness, it makes a lot more sense to have that in black and white so that the colors pop out even more. So examples of indirect prioritization of accessibility features are here shown in green. So we have the, for instance, the way that I handle the color blindness mode. One aspect of the color blindness mode is that the background turns gray. That graying of the background was not code that was part necessarily of the dancing background per se. It has been added in very easily by basically taking the animation and turning it into gray tones. So in this sense, it's the code written to do that is not necessarily part of the code to show the dancing animation. Then think about, for instance, animation brightness. It's a very similar feature. Basically what it does is that it takes that animation and turns it darker until it's completely black and you cannot see it anymore. This is in a similar way code that was very easy to add later to the background animation. And then finally, but maybe this may be a better example, is the rumbling to the beat. Rumbling to the beat may or may not be for you essential in a rhythm game. To me, it isn't. A rhythm game can also be played without having a rumble feature. So you can still keep out the rumble feature and have a completely functioning rhythm game. It's, however, completely possible and easy to later, after you have finished the gameplay mechanic of the rhythm game, to add in that rumble feature. Because it doesn't require you to go back into the original code of the gameplay mechanic and change something there to suddenly have the rumble to your game. Of course, you would hook it up to the beat, but it doesn't necessarily force you to go back into the gameplay mechanic of the rhythm game and then change stuff in there. Another aspect of how I developed Ecstasy was iteration. Releasing early and doing so in an iterative process. So what does that mean? Well, you know how they say that the first 10 games that you make are going to suck? It's not really true, is it? If you are willing to develop a game, preferably a smaller project, and then collect feedback take your ego and throw it out the window and really listen to the feedback that people are given, you will be able to learn from that feedback on the fly and change your video game to make it better and to make it somehow work. A lot of the ideas that we have really just require a little bit more time and a little bit more feedback and iteration for them to really flourish and become the games that we actually had pictured in our minds. And the way that you do that is by collecting feedback. So you have to find people that are willing to be honest and direct, that are not going to placate you. They're not going to just be nice, say, oh, it looks great, because it's always nice to get positive feedback, but it's much better to also get negative feedback. What I find incredibly valuable of the accessibility community is that they are really passionate about making games more accessible. So if you ask for advice and feedback, you give them your game, they will give you very, very wonderful feedback. Ideally, I would have had somebody with cognitive disability, or somebody with a visual disability and somebody with a hearing disability, all giving me separate feedback. But would really help us also just to post it on Reddit, and then having like showing what I made, showing what I did, and getting feedback from that, or finding people like Antonio Martinez that played the game and gave a lot of valuable feedback at the beginning of development that really influenced the way that the game came together in the end. So there you have it. I think I gave you a pretty detailed run through of like what my mentality was during the game, thinking agile, making the game evolve and allowing it to evolve with the players. The game is out now on itch.io and Steam, and it will be coming to consoles later this year. I'm very proud of that. But to be honest, those let's just say porting a game over to consoles, it doesn't come cheap. So if you like what I'm doing, I would really love for you to, maybe buy the game, buy it on itch. You can leave a tip or not. Otherwise, just follow me on Twitter. I can always have more followers. Have a wonderful day, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.